It's my great pleasure to be with you today to give the keynote speech for a very well-organized African Global Summit, highlighting investments in Africa. I've been listening to all of the panels from morning, and one of the things that struck me when I listened to the very last two ones is that indeed, to borrow Ibokun's word, I think they have said everything, both in complimenting Seplat and in talking about all of the possible investment opportunities in Africa. So I'll try as much as I can to save you time and give this a more interactive session. I'd like to congratulate those who put this together and to thank them for inviting me. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I think one of the things I'll do today would be to highlight those aspects of needs in investing in Africa. I'll zero in on the Nigerian focused experiences and then give you some insights into what we've done in Seplat. The African continent has for several decades been referred to as the potential continent. We're expecting that this appellation for Africa will continue to change, and we're waiting very patiently, and we believe that the time is now for the kinetics to be fired for the growth of real economy in Africa. The dynamics are now changing, and various global fundamental developments have consequently changed all of these. Today, we're looking that this continent is now better positioned as the investment destination of choice. I'm sure that in the last few days, you've been listening to all of the presenters, and all these points are being made clear. I'd like to quickly draw a quotation from a book that was written by a foremost Nigerian, Dr. Kingsley Moghalu, the Deputy Governor of Central Bank, and he had this to say: Africa has become a hot global investment destination over the past decades. As the civil wars have ended, countries stabilized, the continent's macroeconomic management improved, and its economies have achieved a strong track record of GDP growth. Global investors are increasingly paying attention to a continent once described as hopeless, but today regarded as the global final frontier. This is in his latest book. Basically, this is the hallmark of what everyone is talking about, the investment opportunity in Africa. And then what are the key drivers of these investments? Improved in political stability, global growth, especially in terms of GDP. 8 out of 10 fastest growing economies today are in Africa. This provides, obviously, very strong investment opportunity. Increasing macroeconomic stability. The debt to GDP ratios in Africa is lower than what you have in international communities and developed countries. Rapidly growing middle class, providing various aspects and opportunities for investments. Improving infrastructure. We just listened to the very interesting panel on infrastructure. The young and growing population. The population in Africa is expected to double by 2050. But what is even more significant here is the fact that by 2050, Africa will provide 25% of the workforce in the whole world. This by itself is a great demographic dividend, which Africa must take real advantage of. In terms of Africa's size, if you look at Africa being 10 times the size of India, 3 times the size of China, and then you use that to put into perspective what is happening in Africa. It gives you the real opportunity for growth that you have in Africa. This again highlights what I'll be talking to you about in terms of the investment flows as well as the power infrastructure requirement in Africa. Sorry, beg your pardon. Now, this is a very, very important slide for me to talk about. This highlights what Africa represents in terms of oil and gas opportunities in Africa. And this will be the main point I'll be talking about, especially with respect to the Seplat case. Africa represents the production of 10.9% of all oil and gas, production in Africa, in the whole world, and represents 7.8% of its reserve. In terms of gas, it represents 7.8% of gas production. Obviously, these slides have not been arranged properly. But just to let you know, in terms of gas, it represents 7.8% of gas reserve, and the production is about 6.8%. I'll further highlight this on the real impact of this in development in Africa. This shows the investment flows. It's improving in Africa, but Africa remains the very low level when you compare foreign direct investments. This obviously highlights what power is going to be doing, and I'll be using this to illustrate the need for investment in Africa, especially in power. Power is the lifeblood for economic and social development, and this obviously shows you what you need to do in Africa. There's been a correlationship between the relationship of availability of power and the level of human development. In Africa, only 3 countries, Egypt, South Africa, and Algeria, represent the human development index. The rest are below that level. The rest of the world represent the high human development index. This shows the correlation between energy and the key developments in the world. There is a linear relationship between GDP growth and power. And also this highlights this linear relationship. When you correlate the availability of electricity power consumption and the rest of the developments in the world, you find that there is a linear relationship between the human development index and the level of power consumption in every, and in Africa, this is very low. Africa, of course, is entire population of 1 billion people today is just comparable to just Canada. Canada has a population of 35 million people. Entire power production in Canada is 138 138 megawatts, and compared to Africa, 137 megawatts. This by itself shows you the room for investment in Africa. This again shows you the very high losses we're having in power in Africa. This is a very important slide. What this showcases is the fact that Africa, even though that the power is very low in Africa, the cost of power per unit in Africa is one of the highest in the world, because most of the power is self-generated, 25 to 40 cents per kilowatt hour, compared to what is happening with the other uses of power. Look at what you'll be spending for gas, 8 to 12%. This basically shows you what it takes in terms of investment flow into power in Africa. This again highlights a very important information regarding the per capita consumption of electricity in the world. Only 3 African countries meet the threshold of 2,500 per kilowatt hour. That is Egypt, South Africa, and Mozambique. This again shows you the slide that shows that Africa is indeed suffering in the midst of plenty. Look at the huge reserve of gas, with Nigeria taking the lead, 182 trillion cubic feet of gas in reserves. Look at the rest of Africa, the east, the west. All over Africa is studded with gas, and yet this continent remains in darkness. It is very, very important aspect to stress how much investment that we need to have in Africa. Then, of course, in Nigeria, to state the Nigeria case and then how it relates to the Seplat case. In Nigeria today, there are 3 key elements that are driving investments that now made the case for Seplat. Number 1 is the gas revolution. gas to power, gas to industry, and gas to agriculture, which the administration has put in place. The next is the Nigerian Content Act, which basically creates an opportunity for Nigerians to participate in investment in this industry. And the third is the asset rationalization. I call this asset rationalization by the international oil companies, not divestment, because what is happening is they are selling the assets in the upstream onshore and moving deeper offshore, where you have the real deep pocket requirement for them. And then what did we do in Seplat? We now took the advantage of this in Seplat to grow a very formidable company. We pioneered the acquisition of assets from the multinational oil companies. We started in 2008, 2009, formed the company between two Nigerian indigenous companies. In 2010, we quickly pioneered the acquisition from the international oil companies. Once we did this, we hit the ground running. Look at the levels of what we had, 14,000 barrels a day production of oil. And of course, we've grown that since to 60,000 barrels a day by 2013, and grown at the same time all of our reserves. Every molecule we've produced, we have replaced. Seplat, of course, has the potential to increase the operated production to 80,000 barrels a day by the next 3 years. This shows our location. I'm going to use this to explain to you what we've done in terms of gas. Now, this is our track record. When we started in 2009, we formed the company and put in place a very sound corporate governance, very diverse and experienced board, as well as very efficient and strong management team, the very best you can find in any indigenous company. And this has therefore led us to plan and execute all of our milestones we have set out to do. This is our track record. We started in 2010. We set out to do 30,000 barrels a day. We achieved it in December of that year. We set out to do 40,000 barrels a day by 2011. We achieved it. 2013, we achieved 50,000 barrels a day production. 2013, we also have hit 60,000 barrels a day. Now, why we've been able to do this is because of the very strong management team we've put in place. Look at everything you've seen here. We call this slide not by chance, because everything we've done here has been carefully planned and executed very efficiently. And going forward, because we have very clearly defined growth strategy, we decided that this company should come to the stock market. And by April of this year, we achieved the dual listing and raised an IPO of over $500 million and completed the pipeline we did this year as well. Now, this is what we've done in the communities. This is one of the planks of our strengths in the Niger Delta. Because we definitely transformed the relationship in the Niger Delta communities, it used to be the case that in the Niger Delta, the communities were regarded as the real problems. But when we got in there, we set up a very proactive engagement of the community. And what we did there was to ensure that we build capacity within the communities. And in doing this, we empowered them, made them true partners in our business rather than just people who we go there and do business with. And that became a win-win situation. For us, we engaged more than 40 communities in the areas where we operate, created job opportunities for them, put our operational headquarters in this area, and that created the win-win situation. And we did not go there to hand out money to them. We made sure we abolished what we call tokenism, and then ensured that the communities participated in everything that we did. They identified their projects and we implemented them, and all of the things we did in addition in our corporate social responsibility program therefore brought us the confidence of the communities to operate. Now look at the real business impact of what we've done. In 2010, when we took over, what we decided to do was to map all the incidences of disrupted operations in our pipelines or in our assets. In 2010, 2011, we recorded 7 incidences. Each of these represents an incident and the number of days it took us. In 2011, we had 7 incidences. 2012, we had 4 incidences. 2013, we have had 0 incident. And up to this moment, we have 0 incident in disruption of anything that we're doing. And this has been the real dividend of working and engaging the communities very, very well. So what are we doing? I had said earlier on that the key plank of our growth are 3. 1 is acquisition of assets. 2 is organic growth. Number 3 is gas development. And why do we say this? Because gas is by far the most important investment opportunity in Africa. And that is what we've decided to do in our company. And so what are the drivers of this gas development? Number 1, government privatization and deregulation. This has worked very well in Nigeria. Recently, the Nigerian government has commenced the privatization in Nigeria. And what we've seen with this is real growth in demand for gas and at the right price. Gas revolution program I talked about earlier on, fiscal incentives and policies to encourage commercial gas production. The price changes, 0 flare targets. In Seplat, we're planning that we'll be flaring out by the end of this year. Increased percentage of energy removal from gas. There's also the government drive to reduce dependence on energy import and then move from import dependence towards export-oriented economy. Government indigenization policy. This is very, very key. The Nigerian content policy has therefore made it possible for a lot of Nigerian companies to continue to invest and therefore attract other international investments into the country. New discoveries of reserve in various African countries. This is key. In one of the graphs I showed earlier on, you see that a lot of African countries now have oil and gas investments, and most of the emphasis now is in oil. In the entire East African continent, one of the things you have is that a lot of gas is being developed, and this is driven by a lot of demand from East Asia, and the rest of Africa requires this gas for power generation. This is, can I have water? Water. Sorry. One of the lessons I've always said is that Africa remaining the real investment destination is going to be driven by 4 main pillars. One is endogenous cooperation within Africa. This cooperation was highlighted earlier on today. Thank you. The endogenous cooperation in Africa is key. If you consider the fact that it takes faster for someone from Nigeria to come to London versus going to even Congo, you find that cooperation within Africa is key. I think one of the things we heard earlier on today was the cooperation in East Africa, what is happening in Rwanda and Tanzania and the rest of them, building the railways. All of these kind of cooperations will be required in Africa. We must take the destiny in our hands. Improved geopolitical stability and security to create the conducive environment for foreign direct investment flow. This is quite key. Except the governments develop the real political will to begin to change things within the country, that in Africa, the investment flow will definitely remain a challenge. We need to create a very dominant demand for energy in Africa. I've always told that what we're seeing today in terms of oil price, in terms of production of shale gas, is indeed a blessing in the global economy. In Africa, we make the point that the falling oil price is indeed a lesson. It's a wake-up call for African leaders. It is not for us to sit back and complain. I think what Saudi Arabia has done today is to say, look, we can live with low oil price. It is the time for Africans to rethink our economy and take the destinies in our hands and begin to create demands in Africa. If we begin to create those opportunities for Africa demand to increase, then we should not worry about oil prices, because it means that we can create those finished products within Africa and consume them in Africa. Earlier on today, when we were listening at infrastructure and transport, there was a very strong case being made about the cooperation between the East African countries and the railways. Think about running another railway from Mombasa to Congo Port, and then, of course, extending that to Cameroon and to Nigeria. Just think about the volume of energy that will be consumed by that kind of railway. And then think about linking this to South Africa and then taking this to North Africa. The volume of both gas, power, refined products that will be demanded by this will create a serious disadvantage to exporting crude oil. So the message here is Africa should think about Africa. We should begin to create those opportunities that will make us consume most of our energies in Africa. The next point to make, of course, is the reversal of export of natural resources. Earlier on, we have heard variously about the enormous deposits of solid minerals in Africa and the rest of them. The point to make here is that Africa should begin to export finished products rather than exporting our raw materials. This is where we definitely capture things in our value chain. The next thing, of course, is to build very valuable long-term friendship and relationships. It has been the case that China has taken the advantage of some of the hesitancies we see between the Western world and Africa. And what we're seeing today is the real investment flow coming from from China into Africa. But the lesson for the Africans to learn here is it is important that these relationships are indeed mutually beneficial rather than having a one-way track record. I think there were some slides I wanted to highlight here, but I think what we should do is to take some of these into our discussions. But let me spend just 1 minute of your time and highlight 1 or 2 points I'd like to make, and then we start the discussions from there. One of the things I try to point out is the fact that there are key challenges in Africa. And it is when we overcome these challenges, taking the destiny in our hands, that we can definitely make Africa the investment destination of choice. Number one is the infrastructure gap, which was variously highlighted earlier on. The next is the insecurity problem. We know that all over Africa today, we have insecurity in the east, in the west. In Nigeria, we have the Niger Delta problem, which is now being overcome more or less. And then, of course, we have the Boko Haram problem. Most of the times, what you find is that the perception issues remains our major problem. Oftentimes, people do not appreciate what the real issues are. But we believe that Africa, regardless of all of these challenges, Africa still remains the place to do our investments. The next challenge, of course, is the health. Everyone who hears Africa today thinks about Ebola. In Nigeria, we're happy that it's been well contained, but the point to make is that regardless of all of these, given the level of African returns that you make, obviously Africa remains the investment destination of choice. Now, the next point for me to make is what we have done in Seplat with respect to our listing. When we decided that this company will continue to lead in terms of oil and gas in Nigeria, we decided to match our growth strategy with funding. And therefore, we decided that one of the things that we must do was to list the company in the Nigerian and the London Stock Exchange. And this has done a number of things for us. Number one is that it gave us access to the right pool of capital that we can invest. It has also opened our company as an entity for credible investments, especially among institutional investors. And to be able to do this, we managed to put in place a very sound corporate governance, good track record in terms of our management and the rest of them. And that has been what has been driving our growth up to this moment. I think I'll stop so far, and then we can discuss going forward. Thank you.